Countdown to Halloween 2023, featuring eerie and uncanny tales of haunts, ghosts, and suspense. October is finally here. Join us all month for special Halloween presentations on Storylink Radio's YouTube channel as we count down to Halloween 2023. Keep a close eye on YouTube alerts or you'll miss one. Celebrate October with us right here and now. Tonight's presentation from Storylink Radio. The Shape of Fear. Barbara stood confidently in front of the class as she gave her report. The town of Lansford looked as if it had been lifted up from somewhere in Central Europe and plopped right down in the middle of New England. The people of Lansford were very proud of their old-world customs and beliefs. Most of their traditions were harmless, but there was, one in particular that was quite bizarre. Some folks believed in the existence of vile creatures known as were-people, evil beings who looked like humans but could change their shape at will. Barbara was not at all nervous as she talked. Her family had lived in Lansford since the town was first established nearly 2 centuries before, and she knew more than most kids her age about its history. Were-people could take on many animal forms and characteristics and were known as shapeshifters, she said. They would use this ability to harm others, she read from her paper. In the guise of a raven, a were-person could spy on its neighbors and learn their secrets. As a fox or a wolf, it could dig up and destroy crops or kill livestock. As a deadly spider or rattlesnake, it could even creep into a home or tent and commit murder without leaving behind a single clue as to its human identity. Barbara paused and looked around. Everyone was caught up in every word she said. Mrs. Kominski, her teacher, was nodding approvingly. This is an A for sure, Barbara thought, glad she had worked so hard on her report. She continued aloud. While a shapeshifter was in its beastly form, it would not age a single minute and could not be killed. Only when it was in its human form would it grow older and finally die. Most people thought that the wicked life of a were-being was a horrible curse, Barbara explained. They believed that to become one you had to be bitten by a were-person. The bite had to be deep and draw blood. Here she lowered her voice dramatically. But at one time in the history of Lansford, the countryside was plagued by 3 terrible monsters who had been the willing prey of a very powerful were-being. They terrorized their neighbors and were finally hunted down and killed. Barbara was very proud of their own ancestor, Jonathan Rourke, had presided over the trials when the trio was finally captured and brought to justice. And the justice of some 200 years before had been swift indeed. In a field near the edge of town stood a huge tree, a hanging tree that had supported 3 sturdy ropes for the accused shapeshifters. The doomed villains had died without confessing the name of their leader, the one who had corrupted them all, but because the vandalism, thefts, and murders had stopped, the search soon ended. Many modern residents were afraid of the hanging tree, but Barbara was fascinated by it. She could easily see it from her bedroom. In fact, it was so close that sometimes, when the moon was just right, Barbara could see its shadow on the thin white curtains drawn across her window. Nothing else grew in the field where it stood. Her dad said that there was probably something in the roots that had ruined the soil. But some superstitious townsfolk claimed that the were-people had been buried there, but no one knew for certain. In fact, Barbara said, lowering her papers and whispering to her wide-eyed classmates, no one knows what happened to the bodies at all. Thank you, Barbara, Mrs. Kominski said. That was an excellent report. You may take your seat. After class, Barbara and several of her friends stopped in the local bookstore to buy the newest issue of their favorite scary magazine, Tales from Beyond the Grave. It was displayed on a tall wire rack right beside the front entrance. Oh, look at this stupid cave monster, Angela complained. It couldn't frighten my baby brother. I think the were-people of Lansford are a lot scarier. And they really existed. Barbara laughed and shook her head. No, they didn't. It's just a stupid old story that grandparents used to frighten their grandkids. Dolores began. Well, but what about your report in class? You said that your own ancestor helped to catch them. I said he helped to catch 3 people who are accused of being were-people and committing crimes. Barbara laughed and corrected. I never said I actually believed they really were shapeshifters. I bet old Jonathan didn't believe it either. That's why he wasn't afraid of them. Angela tilted her head to one side and asked, What do you mean? When the bad guys had been caught, Jonathan was the only one brave enough to actually do the hanging and pronounce them dead, Barbara answered with pride. All the other people were too afraid to get close. They were probably scared of getting bitten. She lunged at Dolores, pretending to bite her neck. Dolores squealed, and the other girls laughed. All at once, Barbara became aware of someone standing near the group. She looked up slowly. A small, thin-faced woman with mournful eyes was glaring at her. It is very foolish to make jest of the things that you do not understand, the woman warned. Jest? Grinning, Barbara wrinkled her nose and made a funny face at her friends. Quite so, Mistress Barbara, the stranger continued. The grin faded from Barbara's lips. How do you know my name? A dark smile barely flickered across the woman's grim face. Think of me. She paused, and the smile became almost threatening. Think of me as a friend of the family, Barbara. She turned and walked quickly out of the store. Who was that weird woman, Mistress Barbara? Dolores murmured. Barbara leaned against a large storefront window and gazed in the direction the woman had taken. Except for a couple of young boys wheeling their bikes along, the sidewalk was deserted. I don't know, she answered nervously. She had an uncomfortable feeling she had not seen the last of the old woman. It's such a lovely night, Barbara's mom said as she leaned in the doorway of her daughter's room that evening. Dad and I are going to take a walk. Would you like to come along? Barbara glanced up. No, thanks. I have reading to finish. Her mom crossed to the bedroom window, pulled back the curtains, and opened it. Well, at least you can get some fresh air in here, she said, stroking Barbara's long brown hair. We'll be back in a while. As soon as she was alone, Barbara tossed the book to the floor and got up to reclose the window. She had her hand on the sill when she noticed something that made her stop. Someone was hunched over beneath the hanging tree. Leaning out slightly, Barbara could just make out the sound of a shovel biting into the barren earth. What in the world? Barbara muttered under her breath. As she spoke, a silver-rimmed cloud slipped away from across the face of the full moon. Barbara gasped. It's her! In the bright moonlight, she could clearly see the woman who had spoken to her in the bookstore. At first, it appeared that she might be digging something up, but after a moment, it was plain that the stranger was actually burying a small, dark object. Barbara watched with growing curiosity. Finally, the woman completed her task and set off hurriedly along the dirt road that led to town. Barbara pulled the eyelet drapes closed and stood at the window for only a moment before she made up her mind to see for herself what was hidden away beneath the tree. If she acted quickly, she knew she could slip out and be back before her parents returned from their walk. So throwing on a sweater, she raced to the garden shed and grabbed a small hand trowel. Within moments, she was standing under the twisted limbs of the tree. She had stood in the same place many times before, but never alone at night. The branches cast peculiar shadows to the ground all around her, and when the breeze rustled the dry leaves, the ground almost seemed to be moving as if... Barbara shuddered to think about it. I better get out of here before I start spooking myself, she said aloud. She easily found the place where the woman had been digging and started to work in the soft earth. It wasn't long before the trowel hit something hard. Working rapidly, Barbara unearthed a small carved wooden box with a plain metal pin and clasp. Hesitantly, she slipped out the pin and stopped. She had an eerie feeling that she was being watched. Glancing from side to side, she reassured herself that she was alone. And then from somewhere in the darkness, Barbara heard a soft rustling noise. Probably just a possum. But she could barely control the trembling of her fingers as she cautiously lifted the lid of the box. Moonlight illuminated a small shiny object. A tooth. Some sort of animal tooth on a thin leather strap. It rested on a fragile scrap of paper that appeared to have been torn from a book. As she stared inside, a shadow moved across the contents of the box. Barbara turned her gaze upward, and her eyes locked with a pair of glowing yellow eyes. A scream caught in her throat. Crouching on the limb above was a large creature, part wolf, part ferret, part rat. Slowly it edged toward her, clinging to the ancient branch with its long, curved claws. Clutching the box, Barbara spun around and ran. Reaching the safety of her home, she slammed the door behind her and locked it, then raced to her room. She fell across the bed, tried to catch her breath, and then chuckled to herself. This is ridiculous, she declared to the smiling teddy bear in her dresser. It was only dumb animals. She opened the box to examine the contents more closely now. Holding the sharp-pointed tooth in the palm of her hand, she took out the folded paper and spread it open on her bed. The words were handwritten in a strange language. What is this? Looks like Latin or something, Barbara whispered to herself. Slowly she pronounced each word. Then something, a feeling, forced her to look up at the drapes drawn across the open window. The light from the full moon had painted a shadowy image of the hanging tree. It danced back and forth as the delicate white fabric moved in the soft breeze. While she watched, 3 of the horrible creatures like the one she saw in the tree before stole along the lowest branch and dropped to the ground. As if she were in a trance, Barbara's eyes returned to the page. She felt compelled to continue. She had barely spoken the last word when the first creature crept soundlessly over the sill of her open window. With growing terror, Barbara curled against the pillows as a furred paw gripped the edge of the bed with razor-like claws. The beast drew itself up onto the bed, and once again Barbara stared into its yellow, glowing eyes. "It is time," the thing hissed. "It is time to fulfill your part of the bargain, Mistress Barbara. It was most cooperative of you to voluntarily retrieve the box and read the agreement. But then we counted on your being too curious for your own good." Barbara had heard the voice before, that very day in the bookstore. "This isn't happening," she stammered. "I must be dreaming. I didn't make any bargain." "But you did. You have just agreed to it by reading the very words that have set us free." 2 more of the hideous creatures slipped into the room. "It was promised by your own ancestor, Jonathan Rourke, the were-being who made us what we are." "You're lying," Barbara screamed. "He wasn't a were-person. He killed you." "No." The beast showed its fangs with a nasty snarl. "He made it appear so. We did indeed give up our human forms and vowed to live as animals to soothe the townspeople's need for vengeance. Afterward, your ancestor lived out his life free of suspicion. In return, he arranged for us to have our freedom and a new time, a time when the old beliefs would be considered no more than tales told to frighten children." Barbara shook her head in disbelief. "You see," the creature continued, "Jonathan Rourke pledged that in 10 generations his own descendant would appear and take our place. As the time drew near, I was able to appear briefly as a human to carry out the plan." "No!" Barbara gasped. "I don't want any part of this." As she watched, the 3 creatures began to change. Their limbs stretched outward. Their faces began to take on more human features. "Oh, but it's too late," the woman snarled. "The curse has already been passed to you by the bite of your own ancestor. See for yourself." She gestured toward Barbara's clenched fist. Opening her hand, the girl saw the tooth she had clutched in fear. The tooth of Jonathan Rourke had deeply pierced her palm. Her own dark red blood trickled down her wrist. Before her own eyes, Barbara watched her trembling hand shrink into dark, fur-covered paws and her nails lengthen into powerful claws. She opened her mouth to scream, but the sound was no longer human. Not far away, on the path leading to their home, Barbara's mother gripped her father's arm. "What was that?" she cried out. He patted her hand and said soothingly, "Oh, it was nothing, dear. Just some kind of animal." You've just heard tonight's story from Storylink Radio's Countdown to Halloween 2023. Remember to come back for our next tale. Many more stories of all genres available to listen to and read along with now on our website at www.storylinkradio.com. Visit our YouTube channel at youtube.com/storylinkradio. And visit our podcast for easy mobile listening anywhere, anytime. Just search for Storylink Radio on your favorite podcast provider. Oh, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and click that alert bell for Storylink Radio.